One or 2 points. I want you to start with 2 points.
Okay.
Dust and debris in the gun barrel.
Yeah.
Secondly, the fact that there were 5 sets of prints, 5 plus actually by the end of the testimony, 5 sets of prints. Tyler Robinson's was the most degraded. So I would like you to explain how Tyler Robinson's prints could be the most degraded when she said, actually, you could have DNA on something that you've touched. You could have DNA on something that you've never touched. And to get DNA degradation, they've looked at pieces, items 20, 40 years on that don't have degradation. Yet Tyler Robinson's prints, amongst 5 plus other prints, were the most degraded on that weapon.
Yeah. So let's get into all 3 of the claims. First, with debris. When it comes to debris, firing a rifle doesn't always blow the debris out of the barrel.
Okay. You think there could be debris and dust.
Yeah.
He just fired the weapon.
Sure.
Okay.
Not only that, he left it in a forest. Now, I don't know if you agree with me, but if you leave a rifle in a wooded area, it's also possible that debris could get in that way. But I'm not even sure that that's what the case is. I think it's far more likely that he fired the shot. It just didn't blow all the debris out, and it often doesn't. You'll find this if you take Grandpappy's dirty rifle, and it's all dusty inside the bore, and you go fire it. You'll often look down the bore, and there's still dust.
Okay,
happens all the time.
Okay, and the prints?
Yeah, so the prints we don't know all of the details on just yet.
We do. It was excruciatingly long testimony on the prints.
We don't because they haven't gone to trial, so we don't know on the print front. But Tyler Robinson's DNA was on there. You made the claim that Lance Twig's DNA was on there, and it was not.
Well, when she gave the testimony, hold on. First, let's go to your first point because that's wrong. We can get a fact check on that. What do you mean we don't know until it goes to trial about the degraded prints? She testified, and this is the person who took the prints.
Yes, but the problem is that inside of this particular testimony, you agree with me that there's going to be much more of the DNA analysis during the trial, right?
But you also would agree that her fact is not going to change, that among the prints, his was the most degraded. So I'm asking you to address that. How could that be possible?
Let's give it, let's just grant this for a second as a possibility that his fingerprints were degraded.
It's not a possibility. It's a fact. The person who took it.
I'm just granting it for the sake of argument.
You should grant it because it's a fact that she presented.
So now it's granted. So what?
What do you mean, so what?
Yeah, so what? What does that prove?
It proves that if his prints were the most degraded amongst 5 of them, you're going to have to explain how that's possible if he's the one that recently fired the weapon.
Listen, Andrew's my boy, but I don't like the direction he took this in. I don't know if he just wasn't prepared enough or he wanted to see what Candace would say to substantiate it, but there's a much better route he could have taken in order to disprove her fingerprint theory. And it has to do with the testimony of the ATF's expert witness. It's true that Tyler's DNA was highly degraded, but this doesn't mean what Candace says it means. The ATF's expert witness went on to say that DNA could degrade for all sorts of viable reasons, such as exposure to heat or cleaning, meaning if Tyler had wiped the gun where he had touched it, that could very easily explain the degradation. And it's not just that 5 people's DNA were found on it, because this requires greater context. First off, Tyler's DNA was found all over the gun, but the DNA from the other sources were only found on a few select spots. This is consistent with Tyler being the one who primarily handled the gun. But it's not just putting the DNA evidence into its proper context. It's also incorporating corroborating evidence. For example, if 4 people have DNA on a murder weapon, but 3 of those people have alibis, then it clearly points to that 4th person doing it. Likewise, if there are 5 people whose DNA is on a gun, but only 1 person was caught on CCTV going around campus, going up to the Losi Center, jumping off the top of the Losi Center, that points to 1 person. Again, I'm not sure why Andrew didn't bring this up, but this was a real missed opportunity.
As the elimination samples that she was using. And so she explicitly said some of them, so we can assume 2 out of the 3, their prints were found on the gun. She explicitly named Matt Robinson as someone who had prints on the gun, and then said there were 5 people that they had taken that sample from. And again, what's also relevant here is the earlier testimony, which came from the FBI forensics analyst, I believe it was on day 2, where she said that when you're using those mixtures and those samples and you get up to 5+, it's really hard to make any sort of a determination. So both of those things are relevant.
This actually goes back to an earlier video I made about Candace. This is explicitly false. So that expert witness testified that the DNA was more than 1 trillion times more likely to have come from Tyler Robinson than from anybody else. 1 trillion times. There's a reason Candace deliberately cut off the video before it showed that during her stream. Now, I know nobody's shocked that she's lying right now, but I can guarantee you this is going to be far from the last one she tells.
A right to pursue. It's not a conspiracy. It's actually proof of my claim that there is evidence that he was set up as a patsy.
That wouldn't prove anything about him being a patsy.
It said it's evidence to support the claim that he could have been set up as a patsy.
So this is why I said earlier, so what? Because even if it's the case that this doesn't have an explanation for it yet, that doesn't actually give you any evidence in your corner for Tyler Robinson being a patsy.
Okay,
hang on. I didn't cut you off, right? You would need to actually explain how this would demonstrate Tyler Robinson. This is tied into Robinson being a patsy. Mm-hmm. Are you claiming that these fingerprints were Lance Twiggs or that he had any DNA there?
I'm saying that it could be Matt Robinson. It could be Amber Robinson. That sort of information is going to come out during the trial.
How would that tie into the idea that he's a patsy,
Yes,
though?
because if his is the most degraded prints and the information that I shared on my platform is true, that this gun was given to Tyler Robinson as an heirloom. I had conversation with members of the Robinson family, Twiggs family, both of them. You know, like I said, we're not just dreaming. And if we're having those conversations and they told me that gun was only given to Tyler Robinson because it was a family heirloom. Okay, so it was his grandfather's gun or great-grandfather's gun. Okay. I don't remember the difference. I don't remember which one it was. And so he got it because he's the firstborn. So, but he's not much of a shooter is what I was told. And so he has this because he inherited it, essentially. So if I get something from my grandpa and I put it up on the shelf and I own this, you could see that could be...
How do we get to the patsy part?
You don't let me ever get to the end of the sentence. So how could we get to the patsy part
okay,
if I can't get to the end of the sentence?
I'll wait patiently till we get to the patsy
So that could be
part.
a reasonable explanation as to why there was dust in the barrel, because he doesn't often shoot this weapon and he is indeed a fisher. And it could also be a reasonable explanation for why we have Matt Robinson's prints on this. Obviously, Lance Twiggs, even if he has prints on things, they live together. That doesn't really mean anything. But that could demonstrate that somebody took his weapon and put it somewhere. His prints are the most degraded. Somebody else's prints, there's more presence of somebody else's prints. And that could demonstrate that somebody is taking items from his house and putting it into various places.
But it also could demonstrate nothing. So the problem that you have here is that this is pure conjecture.
No,
this is not evidence that Tyler Robinson is a patsy. It's only evidence that you have conjectured up that, if it's the case that these are the more degraded prints, then therefore that means must be patsy because dad's fingerprints on gun.
I didn't say must be patsy.
Describe how this actually links in to Robinson being a patsy.
Okay, I just described that for you, so I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you, so I'm going to move on from that.
This is my favorite moment of the whole debate, man. I explained it to you, but I can't make you understand it. So I'm just going to move on. That's Candace Owens speak for saying she has no way to actually substantiate her conjecture. Andrew's right to call her out on this because the conclusion she makes does not logically follow from the premise. And she knows it. That's why she pivots away so quickly.
I used basically three pillars for the totality of the evidence. Okay, so if you want to know exactly what those three pillars are, this is going to be the testimony with the text messages, and the confessions. This is going to be the physical evidence, and this is going to be the totality of the summary of the case. Okay, so right now we're focusing on one of these pillars in my defense, which is fine. I understand that I have to defend my claims as well. So when we're talking about the messages themselves, they seem totally valid. I have no idea why they wouldn't be valid. And I have not heard any good explanation for why it is that these messages should even be questioned. The defense hasn't questioned them, as far as I'm aware. Nobody has actually questioned that these messages came from Robinson to date, except perhaps you and other people who are kind of in that camp. But why should I question these exactly? I'm not sure.
Okay, so first let's just go over legally what the point is of a probative hearing. The defense is not they're not there to say or to argue or to defend themselves at all. They have to address what is being presented by the state, okay? So they're not here to then say, let me give you an explanation for these text messages.
Agreed.
The relevant portion of what the defense did do was actually before we got to the preliminary hearing. I had mentioned that it was initially supposed to be scheduled for some time in May. They asked for an extension. That reading through those filings of why they were requesting an extension and why I actually believe their extension should have been granted, because they did not receive discovery on their text messages. That was one of the reasons. There were many reasons why they wanted to have an extension, but this was crucial, right? So forget just the general sense that these messages feel off. And yes, you are allowed to have an intuition. You are allowed to have a sense and just go, this is very weird. We're being told this kid had like above a 4.0, Tyler Robinson. He wanted to get away. I think the text messages almost run head to head with themselves. Like he wanted to get away with it. So he thought the best thing to do would be to text a full confession of what he did, down to what I didn't even remember, saying, yeah, and that's also me in the surveillance footage. It felt a little too on the nose. People have common sense. You just don't text message. But then we're also supposed to believe that he put a note under and burn this and get rid of the evidence. But don't worry about that because I'm about to text you a full confession. That it felt off. It felt weird off the bat. The manner in which they were texting, we're told he's like a gamer who's using a Dremel to carve expressions, catch fascist. But then suddenly he's writing like a 1700
also, as a Helldivers
novelist
player, he did actually get the 500K code correct.
Yeah, I'm not a gamer, so we'll say that if we start debating that, you'll be way over my head.
But yes,
but my point being is just that, just first, it's a general sense of why people had a reaction to these messages that seemed like they were written by Jane Austen rather than like a kid who games and writes catch.
Yeah, but do you see
fastest.
how that's intuition?
That is, I am. I just said that. I said just parking aside the intuition of just something feels wrong here, which you should follow your intuition. You should actually do that. If you say the COVID vaccine is running out, feels like it's coming out too fast and there's too many celebrities telling me to do it, I'd like to take a pause. That's good. That is, you are allowed to do that. I believe in intuition.
But hang on. Let me respond a little bit here because you've been going for a minute. Let me at least respond to a little bit of this. So the first thing is like when people bring up the COVID vaccine, not trusting the COVID vaccine en masse was the science. That wasn't just intuition. That was the science. There was tons of competing science. Now, they tried to suppress it. That's true. But there was tons of competing science for why you shouldn't take a risky mRNA vaccine and masks and things like this.
Kept telling us was 100%.
Now, when you're talking about intuition, though, when you say trust your intuition, I'm actually giving a different message. You actually should be very wary about trusting just your intuition. It is true that intuition can be useful, but it has to be tempered with logic, reason, explanatory power, and evidence, not just intuition.
To be totally fair to Candace, there does seem like there was a coordinated effort to kind of like fight against her narrative by a lot of these right-wing influencers, seemingly kind of fibbing about seeing that 4K video evidence in court. That was optically not a good look. We don't need to fight a narrative with a counter-narrative if the truth is on our side. And Andrew has actually denounced that as well, because it's dumb. You can't give the other side ammunition like that. Now, on to the point about intuition. Trusting your intuition can be very valuable. But you can't trust your intuition exclusively, especially when it runs against the preponderance of logical evidence.
Let's get to the parents fact check.
So I was saying, I believe what you're talking about was derived from the charging doc, which was signed off by Brian Davis.
Let's pull it up.
Let's see if that's correct. What are we looking at
Robinson's mother explained that over the last year or so, I'm sorry.
Can you zoom in a little bit?
Is this the charging doc?
I can't see it. Robinson's father reported that when his wife showed him the surveillance image of the suspected shooter in the news, he agreed that it looked like their son. He also believed that the rifle that police suspected the shooter used matched the rifle that was given to his son as a gift. As a result, Robinson's father contacted his son and asked him to send a photo of the rifle, which makes sense with the text messages. Robinson did not respond. However, Robinson's father spoke on the phone with Robinson. Robinson implied he planned to take his own life. Robinson's parents were able to convince him to meet at their home.
Yes. So this is proving my point. This is from the charging document, correct? Yeah. So what I'm saying to you is that 3 people got interviewed on that night. Mike Mitchell got interviewed, Amber Robinson got interviewed, and Matt Robinson got interviewed. Of the 3 of them, only one of them actually wrote a statement, which was referred to in this preliminary trial. He came in, I believe, in March, Mike Mitchell, and he wrote a statement, which I find to be very shady that they decided to bring.
But why aren't the parents disputing that?
No. Well, first off,
that's the question I've been asking.
The parents are not going to ever play in court play to the cameras in court when they have a legal team that is going to be advising them not to speak to the court because your son could go to prison forever.
But they're playing to somebody else who's your source?
I'm not going to address that.
They're playing to someone else who's your source, but won't go publicly tell the media this is not true?
Well, what I did not say to you that I just said I have a source, so I want to be very clear, and take it from somebody who is involved and permanently sued. When I have to take my lawyer's advice, I mean, there's so many things that I want to respond to when people are speaking about.
Yeah, but it's bizarre that they would utilize a source which would get the information to you, but wouldn't just go to the media and be like, actually, that's all wrong.
I am telling you that you would nary find a lawyer who would advise you to go to the media. And speak.
This mother,
especially when your son is
was
up for death.
If I thought that my kid was in any way, shape, or form going to be up, you couldn't shut me up. Or my wife, she would be like, "That's not true. That's ridiculous. There's no possible. That never happened. These people are lying through their teeth. They'd be public whether you like it or not."
So this is a point where Andrew catches her in another contradiction. Tyler's parents wouldn't be shouting from the rooftops that Tyler was innocent if they thought he was truly innocent because of advice from a lawyer or possibly a gag order, something like that. But then on the other hand, they're somehow communicating with her source. That doesn't make any sense. Why would a gag order or attorney advice prevent one of those things from happening, but not prevent the other thing from happening? It would be all or nothing.
Specifically is like, who could shut parents up who are like, "No way, there's no possible, this never happened. This is ridiculous." They would be shouting it on CNN. They would be shouting it from the rooftops. They would be losing their minds. And you're like, nope, the gag order would be enough to keep them quiet. Not enough for them to talk to your source, but enough to keep them quiet. I think that that's quite ridiculous. But I'll even concede this whole point to you. Let's just say maybe this was misconstrued, right? There's a little bit of reason to doubt it because we're still waiting for the evidence for trial. If that's the case, then why not take the same standard for the evidence that you present? You're just waiting for trial.
Well, you didn't do that.
Wait a second.
We're here.
Wait a second. I just want to make sure that I got this right. That's your argument to me, right?
My argument to you is what?
Your argument to me is that, hey, wait a second, Andrew. There's not enough here that convinces me, right?
Well, that's actually my rebuttal to you, is that you are saying, why are people engaging in what you term to be conspiracy theories?
No.
I term it to be thinking. They're just thinking because they're recognizing there are a lot of holes in these stories and that this is not strong evidence, right? This is the reason they're doing it. I'm explaining to you, this is the reason that they're doing it. I'm addressing what you view to be overwhelming evidence. And by the way, I want to be clear.
That which convinces me.
But thus far, every point that you've brought up, every point that you've brought up, did you feel like this is beyond a reasonable doubt? I mean, you realize
remember what I said in my opening.
Going to be.
It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just what I find convincing is what I find overwhelming.
So why are you so upset when people say they don't find it convincing?
If that was the limitation of the claims that you made, if it was just, wait a second, there's a little bit of problems. There's some problems in this case that I have questions for that I want answers to. Nobody would have a problem, actually. Least of all me. I would be the least likely person to have an issue with you, any of your fans, anybody saying. In fact, I've had tons of Discord calls about this. My position's always been clear. Of course, conspiracies exist. Some of them have way better evidence than others. But I've seen them myself. I know conspiracy. In fact, the federal government has hundreds of thousands of laws about conspiracies. They see them everywhere. We both know this, right? That's never what the problem is. The problem is when you make claims outside of, well, wait a second. I'm just questioning evidence here. I'm just questioning what the state's case is here. I'm just asking questions. It's when you make claims outside of that, where you claim that there's good evidence or good standards you should believe because, and then it turns out that it's all nonsense or it's wackadoo stuff or it makes no sense. And when we have a chance to cross-examine your evidence that you've presented, I'm going to show a lot of that. A lot of this conjecture that's based on literally nothing, that leads from no inferences whatsoever. Like you couldn't even infer it logically. That's the problem. The problem has never been whether or not you just said, you know, there's not enough in this case so far until we get to the trial. I remain unconvinced. I'm sure there's tons of people who remain unconvinced yet until we get to the trial. I think that's fine. I think it's fine. There's people who are convinced too. That's never been my problem. My problem is the claims which are external to that.
Okay. I'm not sure I really care if you have a problem with what I think in my own spare time. I don't understand this like lecture that you just gave. But beyond that, what I'm saying is that if the state is allowed to use, this is what my problem is. You guys are not allowed. Yeah, you guys think while it's illegal. You can. You are allowed to do that. So, but anyway, going back to you saying I wouldn't have a problem. I think I just demonstrated pretty thoroughly that what you claim that you have a problem with is exactly what the state is engaged in at this stage. So it just doesn't make sense.
That's not the case. In fact,
so if people look and they say, I'm looking at the gun and I see, and I'm inferring this, and someone else says, I'm looking at the gun evidence and I'm inferring that, they're both doing the exact same thing.
They're not.
You're just saying, I want to do it for the state.
That's propositionally false.
That is not propositionally
I'll explain
false.
exactly how. It is the case that every proposition is going to have a true or false conclusion, period. That's just logic, right? It's the law of excluded middle. All propositions are going to be true or they're going to be false. When we're making inferences based on propositions. We can actually come to true conclusions with false premises inside of a proposition, in fact. What we're talking about here is not whether or not you feel that you're convinced by this evidence.
But you felt like you were convinced.
Right? Sure. But here's the thing. When you ask me my reason, Andrew, why are you convinced by this? I can give you my reasons why I'm convinced by it, why it seems reasonable and rational to me to be convinced. You could even say, but Andrew, I'm just not convinced by it. If that was the limitation of your claims, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. That's why I wanted to have the conversation, in fact, was so that we could move into your actual claims that you've made, which transcend the idea of, I'm just asking questions.
Andrew's 100% correct to call her out here. Nobody would have a problem with what Candace is doing if she would just stick to, I'm just asking questions. The evidence seems suspect. I'm not sure. But she's not doing that. She's launching into claims like Israel and France were definitely involved. TPUSA and Erica Kirk conspired against him. Oh, it wasn't a bullet. It was an exploding microphone. These are legitimate claims that she has no possible logical basis to infer. But really, this just reveals her tactic. This is the Mott and Bailey. She comes out with the Bailey with the strong position, and when called out on it, she retreats back to the Mott, the I'm just asking questions safe position. It's a rhetorical tactic and a logical fallacy that she just beats to death. Andrew would have called her out on it, but this was explicitly a discussion, not a debate, supposedly under threat of Candace walking out. So he didn't get to do it.